Okay, so I'll just make it a bit formal. Kruti, don't mind for this. So
No,
welcome
no.
all. Yeah, welcome all, and we have today Kruti Shah, architect Kruti Shah, one of the main founder from Chal Chal Agency CCA practice, which is established in Ahmedabad. I think she's a very old friend, and we have different old memories, I think. So I'm really happy to engage her today in our talk. Kruti, I also mentioned here that we are having our faculty team also with us. So we are a
Mhm.
faculty of a team of 7 faculties who are now engaged in semester 5 third year AD studio. So,
Mhm.
and I think we also have other faculties who want to really look at your practice. So I won't take much time. I just invite one of the students, Prashansa, to maybe introduce you. Prashansa, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. Please go ahead with the.
Good evening to one and all present over here. Welcoming Kruti Shah, ma'am, who is founder of Chalchal Agency. After completing her undergraduate study from Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, she carried out her postgraduate studies at CEPT University, where she received a Master of Architecture within the Architectural Design specialization. CCA is a design or research collaborative project founded by Kruti ma'am and Sebastian sir, which works between Ahmedabad in India and Bogota in Colombia. CCS specializes in experimental infrastructure, transformative design, and transdisciplinary pedagogy, locating their area of investigation in the intersection between politics and space. They have been involved in a series of exercises that range from the proposition of public generative devices and light architecture to a dynamic pedagogical practice intertwined with academic research. So I request you, ma'am, to start with the today's seminar.
Thank you so much, Prasanna. I think that was very well said. Thank you so much, Neha, for inviting Chal Chal to be part of this very engaging exercise that you all are doing with the students. And I really appreciate that. And with that, I'll begin my presentation. Hopefully, I will not take long. Sometimes I do take long. So let's see how this one goes.
I think
So
it
can
is
you see my
fine.
screen?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Just a second. Uh, yeah. Um, Sorry, I'm just trying to. Yeah, I'm gonna keep my video off so there's no glitches with the internet.
Yeah, sure, sure. I think that would be good for the presentation also.
Okay, perfect. Um,
Right now, I think I can see your screen. Maybe you want to switch to the PPT.
yeah, yeah, just I kind of messed up my screens. 1 second.
Sure, not a problem.
Yes, yes. Okay, now I'm guessing you can see the screen.
Yes, Kruti. Yeah.
आपण कसं ते पॉड केलं होतं तसं हे
Okay, awesome. Okay, so good evening to everyone there. I'm so happy to see a lot of people interested in what we do with our practice. What I'm going to present to you all is what we call light infrastructures. It's something that we've been developing for the last 3 to 4 years. It's not only a pedagogical research based exploration that we've been doing, but we've also been trying it from our own building experiments that we've been taking forward for the last couple of years. Um, so of course, you already know who we are, so I'm going to skip this. So I'm just going to tell you that today's presentation, we're going to run you through what we think infrastructure is. So we'll run you through what the hypothesis is from our side and why we look at it and why we qualify infrastructure as something that is important to see for an architectural practice. Then we look into political conditions of infrastructure, the structural violence that infrastructure embeds within it. And then I will walk you through something that we call the light space strategy. This, of course, then goes on to talking about the experimentation that we do, which usually is qualified as informal. And finally, I'll walk you through a set of 10 projects that are part of our practice and our academic explorations. So I'll start with what we understand as infrastructure, or what generally infrastructure is understood as. So infrastructure basically is the systems by which a city functions. So it's the functional part of a city, and it encompasses within itself a network or resources or the services that it provides to a city. It is understood as something that is more than human construction. So usually it is understood as something that is very larger in scale. It is usually taken up by technicians or by objective specialists. So infrastructure is something that is very exclusive, and that's what we understand infrastructure as. But on the other hand, what we like to depart, or what we interpret infrastructure, comes from something that Stephen Graham and Colin McFarlane in their book Infrastructural Lives very rightly put, is that infrastructure is understood as a set of processes which encompasses social, material, and technological aspects. It is a mediator between the instances of citizenship, and it is used as a control mechanism. Now, basically, what we understand infrastructure is that it is then a podium of struggles or negotiation. It is generally monopolized by bureaucrats or administrators, so the government. So then how does one, as a designer or a researcher, place themselves into this idea of infrastructure? So then what we then start to understand is that infrastructure has an intrinsically political condition, given that it works as a mediator of power relations between groups or individuals, restricting or facilitating the full potential of life. Infrastructure can be understood as a medium that can manifest processes of structural violence. Now, for some of you who may not have heard this term before, structural violence is essentially the, the violence that takes place through a more structured manner, through the bureaucratic processes by which certain groups of people are neglected from the development of our cities. And so therefore, by its absence or the precarity or poor design of infrastructure, given the production of the bureaucratic or the administrative arbitrariness involved in its management, silently and extensively, infrastructure plays a very important role as a biopolitical agent, which can be assimilated to conditions of systematic disenfranchisement. So to make this more simple, I can, for example, give you a very basic understanding of, for example, there are certain neighborhoods in our city that don't have access to basic infrastructure such as water, electricity, and so on. And that essentially creates a more systematic disenfranchisement, so systematic exclusion of certain groups of people within our city. So to elaborate a little bit further on this, I would like to take you all through this neighborhood called New Faisal Nagar in Ahmedabad. So of course, all of you know that Ahmedabad is in Gujarat, and New Faisal Nagar is located on the southeastern periphery of the city. It is one of the let's say it's one of the neighborhoods that were developed due to the 2002 communal riots that occurred throughout the city, and it's one of the repercussions of pushing away a certain sect or a certain community of the city towards the fringes of the city. And it's also one of the places where they are, for the longest time, they were left without any basic infrastructural facilities. So just to give you an idea, it's like any other neighborhood that we would see, or any other low income neighborhood. It's densely populated. It has its own set of properties such as the Maidan or the playground. It does have a small police station that came up because of the violence that occurred within the neighborhood. So what we did is that we, through our own academic endeavors, through our studio that we do with CEPT University, we were studying this neighborhood very closely for about a year. And we've understood that when you start to zoom into the neighborhood and when you start to look and map the people and the activities that transpire through this entire neighborhood, you begin to see that there is a lot more for us to understand and to take in as terms of a more complex context. So you can see that the Maidan itself has its own life through the day. So you can see the way that the children and the people occupy the space, the different streets that are, so you have like a main market street that that has most of the economic activities that take place in this neighborhood. While the interior lanes, like I mentioned before, you can very clearly see that there is a structural negligence that have led to the kind of photograph that you see here. So you see that water is not available, and therefore you see the entire landscape of the streets having these storage drums, these blue water drums, wherein they receive water through almost, you can say, a kind of water mafia that exists in the neighborhood, which is this informal system that makes or uh, this informal system that can replace what the formal system is supposed to do. So then you can also see that the inner streets have their own typology. It's the space for women. It's the space where all your domestic activities spill out. And of course, you have the children who make part of this very intense landscape and the way I wish that they receive their education or don't. Now, after studying this neighborhood for about a year or so, we were very much interested to understand that, okay, if there are neighborhoods that do not have access to formal infrastructure that the government is supposed to provide, or what they are entitled towards, then how does one make sure that they can still move forward in their life without necessarily being at a disadvantage? So it also became very important to think about immediate actions that can make better the life of these communities till the government or till the system is able to bring in the more formal structure. And therefore, we came up with this idea, which we call the light space strategy. Essentially, this is what we call um, the, the, the the temporalness or the temporal architecture or the temporal response that one can give that can last from like a few weeks to a few years, depending on how then the more permanent solution can come in place. So then what we understand light space strategy is through this book called Loose Space. And I recommend that you'll do, if you get the chance, you should read this book. It's by Karen A. Frank and Quentin Stevens. And what they say is that for us, loose space essentially is a social phenomenon of appropriation, which is it's a space without absolute definition, and it essentially has a function, form, and it encompasses temporality. I think someone's unmuted. Okay. So essentially, then we start understanding light space strategy as a hybridization. It's something that is polyfunctional and it is in constant transformation or adaptation. It is completely decentralized and it is not part of the official narratives. In that sense, lightness as a state of adaptability is also projective character. Methodologically, it is closer to playing since it presupposes an attitude challenging but strategic based on mockery and humor, but also frugality and patience. As a design logic, it can be seen as as an instrument of intuitively examine, test, and discover in interaction. It is to experiment. Now, when we say experiment, what we like to look at is Aaron Betsky, and what he calls as experimental is equal to what is evident. So you experiment with what you stumble upon, and it's this explicit participant in the daily political processes, and it bursts and it transforms based on what it encounters. It seeks to solve a problem differently beyond the intuitively conditioned, and it is counterintuitive. Now, of course, we understand that with experimentation, there is always a risk. There is always a predisposition to failure. The results are not pre-given, and it's indispensable. So it can radically transform without necessarily having a control over it. So therefore, we like to then look at Teddy Cruz and the way he talks about responsible experimentation, and necessarily that is what Chal Agency is based out of. So it's kind of a disciplinary saturation wherein exceptional equated with opulence, that is the form. It is a new paradigm of experimentation, and it is emerging from the margins. It is something that is not your conventional, but rather it is coming from, well, the people who are excluded. So I think someone's unmuted again. Okay. And it has basically an active commitment, and it covers a wider issue. So let's look at informality, because generally what we understand as temporal is also understood as informal. But here we would like to say that informality is for us an experimental category. Informality is understood as a series of practices that are not guided or necessarily dependent of the formal guidelines, but they retain a certain degree of autonomy. Logics of making a city that, although may prescribe tangible and complex problems, are nevertheless conditions to face in our context, and that establish a task not only of experimentation but of significant categorical invention. So here we like to bring forward something that we came across, which is, or we invent or we err, which essentially what we're trying to say is that if at this point, as active citizens of a country that is already pressed for resources, if we do not take upon ourselves to invent solutions and to actively engage with the problems that we face, we're just going to, well, just sit back and do nothing about it. So therefore, then how we kind of wink at this author who is called John Holloway. He talks about how to change the world without taking power. But here we change the word world and we replace it with infrastructure, and we say how to change the infrastructure without taking power. And now this takes me to the more exciting part, I guess, of the presentation. And this is where I would like to walk you all through some of the projects that we've done for the last, I guess, 5 years. So I'm going to start with the very first project that Sebastian and I did together, wherein this is called the Asthai Shala. This was done in 2017. And this was something that we did as part of a competition that was floated by the Serendipity Arts Festival, or the Arts Foundation, wherein they were looking at how do you build a craft school that can celebrate the crafts of Goa. And the brief basically asked us to build a school that can move. So because they did not have a site in place, or they did not have one specific context, the idea of the design was for it to constantly change and adapt as per this kind of site that they would encounter. So therefore, Sebastian and I brainstormed, and then we came up with this idea, which was the idea of a makeshift school. So this was a school that is constantly transforming and remaking itself from the idea of a spatial proposal that can devised a nut and bolt system, so you can very easily screw everything together, and then when you want to dismantle it, you can open up all the nut and bolts and have all of the frames as individuals, put it into a truck and move it to another site. We also use my steel sections because they are also very easily available and they're cost effective. Then we use bamboo because again, bamboo is one of the crafts that in Goa is practiced. And then finally, you have the solar panel and the corrugated metal sheet. Now, something that we consciously decided to do with this project is that we had the main material palette that you can see that we've highlighted on the right-hand side here. But then we also suggested alternative materials. So say in case coconut palm wood or coconut timber is not available, then what is it that you can replace that with? And that is very important to keep in mind because with context, the different materials change, the different availability is changing, and of course, your finance is always a very key component when you have to look at building. And then, of course, we have different material palettes that we propose in place of the bamboo, in place of the corrugated metal sheet, so on and so forth. While the inner pods, we thought of them as very lightweight metal frames that also have this sort of mosquito net covering. So the idea was that because this is within the main structure, it is protected from the weather, and all it needs is some kind of privacy and protection from the environment. So mosquito nets seemed like the most feasible material that we could take up. So this is generally some visualizations that we carried forward to try and look at what the building was like. We also made some physical models. So here also it was important for us to look at how do you make a physical model that can demonstrate the modularity of the building. So as you can see, we had the base that eventually the model was also made in such a way that the agency of the organization of the different modules was with the people who had the module. So you can eventually change the disposition of all your modules such that you can change the format in which the building is placed on the ground. So if you have a linear site, you can have the building to be more linear. If you have something more squarish, you can change the way by which you organize your modules. I'll go on to the next project, which is called the Apni Lari. This was a project that Sebastian did as part of his master's program and his thesis at CEPT University. And then we took it forward as something that we call the cart home. So basically, it's a device for living and working on the street. It's a public good of decentralized administration, and it is an opportunity for those in need. It provides an emergency shelter and working spaces. It's essentially a movable furniture that adapts to our contingencies. Again, something that we did with this is something that both Sebastian and I deeply believe that is part of Chal Chal agency is that for us, research is very important. And every time that we take on a project, we do a competition, or if we are doing our own initiatives, we make sure that we do a lot of on-ground research to understand what is existing and then how can we take that forward. So you can see here that we studied a lot the existing vendor typologies that make part of the Indian urbanity. We looked at what are the different ways by which they are mobile in nature. So what's the different transportation formats that they have? And then finally, we looked at also the material, the different materials that were used to make these carts. From there on, then we took the typology of the cart and then we started to explore what would be the different formats in which you can make it more a public device, make it more a device that makes public space, and it can go beyond its functional aspect. For this particular project, we looked at mild steel box sections. We looked at wheels that came from motorcycles or bicycles. Then we looked at a waterproofing cloth, which in this case was the tarpaulin. Then some insulating surfaces, plywood, and then it was all coated with your primer, lacquer, and so on. So yeah, so you can see here the different layers that made part of this entire project. So there's the use of recycled wood, there's jute that was used for insulation and to trap moisture, tarpaulin which was used to protect it from the sun. We use rope as a structure for hanging. It was a hanging surface, so you can have different objects that can be hung, so you can have your livelihood as part of this. Eventually, we were looking at the different, the cycle of use, so how this object could be used differently for different times of the day. So you can, for example, you can remove this bench. So it's a platform, but then when you remove it, you can open the legs and it becomes a bench for your customers to sit in. You have certain drop down tables. You can make it like a lower table with and it has a dustbin within it, and so on and so forth. Now for us, usually one of the question that we get asked is that we work with a very small scale, but then how do you look at this to have a larger impact? And that's precisely where we put in a lot of efforts to try and understand that if one small object is placed on the street but then is multiplied, then how is it making the street different? How is it adding value to the street and then eventually the public space that it conforms? Of course, eventually this project had different lives, so we also made it part of another competition that was to look at refugee camps in Zatari. And then we had 3 different modules that made part of this. So you have one that is a larger market module, then you had one that also looked at not only for selling, but also eventually can make part of a water system and so on. So this was a prototype that was built. As you can see, it's very simple MS box sections that were used. Then you can see on the underside here, what we did is in Ahmedabad, khatlas or your charpais, we call it khatlas, like these beds wherein you can weave with rope or with these strips of cloth is very common. So what we thought was interesting is to make it part of the roof. And eventually the life of this project was then eventually taken to Manav Sadhana, which is an NGO that works at Gandhi Ashram in Ahmedabad, and they eventually used this particular device. Like you can see, they were very happy to receive it. They did this whole ceremony with it, and eventually it was used for a public good, wherein these water pots were kept, and people, especially in Ahmedabad, the summer is very, very intense, and therefore this becomes a public service of giving drinking water to people who pass by on the street. Um, so yeah, and eventually we also wanted to, I mean, of course, with this project we learned a lot with respect to how do you move this, how do you make it easy for it to navigate through the city, not only within the city, like with respect to the relation to the other vehicles and carts, but also for the person who is handling it. So I mean, we knew all of the failures, but that's precisely what I was saying, that this is for us an experimentation and it comes with its own risk. The next project was something that we did very, it was as a response to a studio that we were doing at CEPT University in 2018, which we call the play methodologies. Usually at CEPT University, at the end of the semester, we have the end semester exhibition wherein the work of the students is displayed. Now, for us, what was very interesting is that because our studio was looking at smaller devices, that was a response to problems that were encountered by communities of New Faisal Nagar, we also thought that this was an opportunity for us to try and experiment with what happens in this exhibition format. So instead of kind of using these stagnant pin-up boards that well, they're not very engaging to the people who are coming to see it, we wanted to push the idea of that and take it onto the cart itself. So what we did is we hired these carts for about 3 days, and we installed these temporary structures on top of the cart. So essentially these two, the cart and the structure can be detached very easily. They're not screwed or nailed, but they're just simply placed on top of the cart. So depending on the dimensions of the cart, we worked out the design. And what we did is we made this with very simple plywood that you can find in the market, and we designed the structure with the students and built it with them. And eventually the idea was that this lari could be moved around the campus, so it's not something that people need to come to, but eventually the work of the students can go to the people around the campus. So as you can see here, our students took the lari around the campus, and they which was very, it was a very interesting experiment to see these sort of devices move around a campus that is otherwise very clean, very, the material palette is just brick and concrete. This was the second time that we did this studio, and we, as part of the end semester exhibition of the monsoon semester 2018, we came up with this particular device, which we call SEPS Kawad. Now, for those of you who may not know, please do look it up. It's a very interesting device, which is, it's a kawad that comes from Rajasthan, and it's a very small wooden object that you can open up and close down, and it basically functions like a small box that reveals different stories of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Essentially, it is a portable temple, and it was something that was ideated as a way to make gods available to people who were not allowed access into the temples. And for us, it was very fascinating to think precisely about how such a small object that can open and close, and by the engagement of the people with this object, you can completely change the way by which you narrate the story of the work of the students or anything that you make part of this entire project. Again, the material palette for this that we used was very simple plywood that we used this kind of tongue and groove joints, or these slot joints that we put together, and then we sandwiched your soft boards within it such that the pinup can be made as part of this. So like you can see that this entire object can open and close, and eventually we were hoping for people to engage with this in a way that they can eventually choose to close one surface or open the other. So this was when we also invited the community to make part of our exhibition, and they were very excited to see the project as well. This is one of our own initiatives that we took, which is, we call this the Pani Lari. Essentially, this comes after a point. Sebastian and I started to think that we were doing a lot of experiments in the more academic realm, but we wanted to transform that and take it out of the university and actually make a difference within the community that we were making our research in, which is New Faisal Nagar. And like you saw the photographs previously, you see that drinking water is something that is a huge issue in the community. And therefore, one of the first things that we wanted to do is that we wanted to come up with a project that can address that issue in a more immediate manner. So we came up with this public mobile water filtering unit that can move around the neighborhood and give access to drinking water to the people at their doorstep. So one of the first things that we did is we customized this entire base, wherein we motorize the entire cart, and like you can see, it's something that we love experimenting with, which is jugaad. And I'm sure all of you know the concept behind jugaad. So you can see that the front of the cart is this, it's half of a bike, and then it was attached to another set of wheels and platform, and then we included batteries and so on and so forth. Um, Eventually we started to construct the upper structure, and again you can see one of the key materials that we find very versatile and maintenance friendly is your metal sections, and we find that very easy to use because that the kind of skills that you require to build with it is easily available, plus the materials that you require to build with it are available in your neighborhood market. And for us, that is sustainable, rather than trying to look for materials that you don't find in the city and then you try and get it from other places and so on and so forth. Then what you can see here is that the infills, what we did is we use metal sheets and then we use plywood to make part of the infills. These were the welders that built this for us. These were the carpenters who made part of the process. And for us, engaging with them is something that is very important because we learn a lot from them. And therefore, they make part of a very key component of our own processes. This is the end. This is how the project looks right now. You can see that the water filtering units were fixed. This we collaborated with a water company in Ahmedabad called Sarjan, and they helped us to design this entire unit such that it could give at least 40 families per week. It could give 25 liters of water. Um, of course, unfortunately, this project in just at the end of it, when we were finishing it, is when the pandemic hit in 2020 and everything closed down. And unfortunately, we've not been able to go back to finish the project or take it to the site, but we're hoping to do this soon. But these are some of the visualizations that we did of the project, because for us, again, it was important not to just address the functional need of the hour, which is access to drinking water, but was also to try and look at this as a device that could engage people in making space. So it became part of the public. It became part of the space making exercise, but also it became an object of awareness. And uh, in neighborhoods like this, it was very important to spread awareness about the health hazards of drinking water directly without boiling and so on and so forth. So this became a pedagogical device in itself. Um, to go on, this was a project that we did in 2019 as part of the winter school program at CEPT University. This we called the Gyan Ashray. This was a project that came to us, well, by chance. We work with this NGO called Center for Development, and through the NGO, we were introduced to this lady here, which is Pushpa Ben, and we were absolutely fascinated by her and her aspirations for the women of her community. And this community is the Valmiki community, so they are one of the um, they are usually in the edges or the margins of our society. And for her, it was very important to empower the women of her community. So one of the things that they do is that they usually meet on the terrace, and there is a very young woman called Ankita, and she's one of the only women in the community who is going to college, and she, along with Pushpa Ben, took this initiative to run evening classes for the women of the community, because something that they felt was that they felt like they were at a disadvantage because they did not know how to read and write, and this is sort of the basic skills that they wanted to develop for themselves. And they were running these classes in the terrace. So when we visited them, we kind of evaluated what was the condition of the terrace. So this was the space wherein they were conducting their classes. And I'll show you some pictures of what that looks like. But eventually we came up with this project that could essentially be a retractable roof that can be placed on the terrace and become the classroom for the women. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. So for that, what we did is we constructed all the metal frames, as you can see here at the CEPT workshop, and then we transported them. We lifted them onto the terrace, and then we kind of started to assemble it on the terrace. So if you see this little GIF that we made, so essentially this is how we put the entire project together. So you can completely open up the roof or close it down based on the need of the hour. This is how the project looks. Now, something that was very interesting when we spoke to the women, because before we started designing, for us, it's very important to have conversations with the people who are going to be using this. And something that the women told us is that because they were on the terrace, the neighboring terraces usually have men hanging out there. And for the women, then it's part of their custom to have a veil over their heads so that the men do not see their faces. Um, so they kind of felt insecure, and they also found it very difficult to be studying with this sort of veil on their head, like the dupatta on their head. So then for them, what they asked us to do is that, can you please create an environment wherein we don't have to keep our dupatta on our head all the time. So therefore, we then took clues from that, and we kind of looked at the entire veil, then not to be on the head, but to be as part of the structure. So you can see the structure is made out of fabrics. And also what we did is we took a lot of clues from the context itself. So the fabric, the colors came from the way that they colored their own houses. Then eventually these fabrics were tailored. They were also thought of in a way that they can easily be untied and washed and reused, or if they sort of get damaged, they can easily be fixed. So that was something that we kept in mind to give the agency of how do you maintain the structure back to the women. So this is essentially how it looks. This was the day that we finished the project, and everyone was very excited to be part of this. So like you can see, this is how they had their classes without the access to infrastructure. And also because it was in Ahmedabad, you cannot have the classes in the afternoon because it's way too hot. So the classes usually happen in the evening. But with the placement of the structure, the dynamics of the way by which they went about their activities completely changed. And that's when we realized that something as small, as temporary as something like this structure, it had the impact and could trigger changes, larger changes essentially. So eventually they started to organize art workshops, and the structure became more than a classroom. It became a community space. It became the identity of the women of the community, and it became a space that they were proud of. And eventually they could have their meetings here, community meetings, meetings with NGOs, so on and so forth. This is a project that we were proposing in Colombia. It's in a neighborhood here. It's an informal settlement, and essentially what we were trying to think about this project is to try and understand how we can propose a community center, a mobile community center within the settlement. So to give you all some context, Bogota is essentially a very mountainous city, and usually the informal settlements get pushed to the slopes of the mountains. So they are in a terrain that is quite difficult. And within this, there is also a lot of violence that occurs in the city. There's a lot of clashes between the different groups. So for us, it became very important then to organize workshops, focus group discussions with the community to try and understand what were their aspirations and what were their requirements with respect to a community center or a center wherein they could all come together. So eventually we like you can see on top here, we had workshops with physical models with the community leader and the people of the community, wherein along with them, we started to make changes in the physical model depending on their inputs. And the project itself was designed with four components. So you have the main the main device, which encompasses the different smaller devices that make part of the entire system. And this particular device can be attached to a motorbike and can be taken around in the neighborhood. So eventually you can see you have this kind of a device that make part of the shading. So you have shades that can be extended. So eventually something that is small can be extended and make part of a larger community space. Um, we created these small mobile units that could house books, so eventually can make part of a library. And eventually you have this sort of table and stool system, so you can have larger meetings take place. So if you see, these are all the different components and make part of that one device, and everything can be tucked into it. um, so yeah, so in terms of materials, we were looking at L sections in this case. So to make it more lightweight, we had plywood, and then we had a lot of fabrics that we were making part of the project. So this is again a visualization of what we think the project could do. I'm coming to the last bit of my presentation now. This is a year and a half research academic project that we've been carrying out, which is called Unit Light Infrastructure. Of course, if you want to see more with respect to this particular project, we also have a website which is called lightinfrastructures.com, or we have an Instagram page. So I would recommend for you all to go see the page if you all want to see more details, because I'm going to just show some snippets of what the students have done. Um, this was a project that was done in the very first semester that we ran this studio, and this is what we call the pad Lari. Essentially, it was a project that we conceived as a way to make accessible sanitary and hygiene goods to the women of these communities, because that is another issue that surfaced as to this sort of stigma that ran within these communities with respect to women and periods. um, so again, we were trying to understand the entire functioning of how women in these communities access public space. Where are the different places in the entire community that they sit at, they gather at, so on and so forth. Now, from that understanding of the community and also trying to understand the different spatial configurations of the community itself. So, for example, things like temporary shading, the kind of water infrastructure, the kind of otlas that make part of the architecture itself. Those were the kind of clues that the students used to then make their own mobile device. So you can see here, they came up with the entire design development of the project, such that they looked at this as something that went beyond the brief that we set up. So it went beyond just a device that made available sanitary napkins to the people from door to door, but then essentially started to become a device that became the identity of the women. So it became work that could have workshops for women empowerment, could raise awareness for menstrual hygiene, could also show documentary and screenings for the women and the girls of the community, could within it carry books and games for the children, because usually children are also part of the system whenever you think of the women. And of course, it could engage the people in different activities. Something that was very interesting for this project, and the reason why I chose to do to show you this project, is the use of the khatla, or the weaving that goes into the khatla as part of the identity of this device. So Again, it is something that is more from the do-it-yourself attitude as to how you can make the whole device and make the infills of the device yourself. Um, this was so another thing that we do very consciously with this studio is that we try and look at design as something that it doesn't stop with just the 3D form or the form making, aesthetic making of the project, but it also goes beyond that, because design is also about how do you implement. There is no point to a design if you don't know how you're going to implement the project. So you can see here that the students engaged with the local NGO that works with the community. They spoke to a lot of the women. We had focus group discussions to try and understand what they felt about the design and then to make changes as per the feedback that was given. With respect to the first time that we did this studio, there was no pandemic, so we were going to build. We were actually going to build a 1:1 prototype of the project. So you can see here we started it, but then we had to stop the entire process. But what the students did here is that they went into the market, they researched on the different materials that were available, and they brought back samples, and they made markups of the different joineries that were going to make part of the working of the device. So, for example, if you're using these pneumatic levers, how is it going to work? How do you close it? Where do you fix it? If you're having foldable legs, then what is the kind of joinery that you should make part of it? Eventually, because the studio went online, we transformed the entire studio and we made them do these construction manuals, which we thought were very useful to virtually understand what is the construction process of making such projects, and who are the different stakeholders and users who make part of the entire process of building. Um, so you can see that these were all the different components that made part of understanding the project. You can see there were details worked out with respect to how do you fold things, how do you make sure that the legs of these fold out seats were protected, so on and so forth. This was a little video that one of the students made, and I just thought that y'all can watch it, because it's also a different way by which you can communicate what you want to do with the design. So yeah, so then we've run the studio like 3 times. So this is the second time that we did the studio where we were all online, and therefore we transformed the entire design brief wherein we started to look at transit settlements within Ahmedabad, and how do you rethink transit settlements as part of the city. Um, because usually if you think about transit settlements, these are groups of people that are displaced due to infrastructural projects within the city. For example, in Ahmedabad, it was the riverfront development that displaced thousands of people, and these people were promised housing by the government, but they were moved into these transit settlements as a temporary basis on the outside, on the outskirts of the city. And one such settlement is Ganesh Nagar, which which came up because essentially of the riverfront development. And as part of this project, the students were encouraged to start thinking about how transit settlements can make part of the city, and how do you dignify these living conditions, because essentially what the government does is that it gives a family 3 by 4 meter spaces like plots of lands, and then they're left to build their own house. They're left without water supply, they're left without electricity. And for, believe it or not, a lot of these families end up living here for years before they are actually allocated a house. So then in that case, how do you think of these kind of temporal settlements that come up as part of the city, um, as a way to think about them from the perspective of architecture and urban design. So I'm going to just walk. So you can see that this particular project had different components. You have the housing kit itself. You have a mobile community center, and then you have these urban elements that make part of the public space. What I'm going to walk you through is the housing unit, because I think that's more relevant to the kind of work you guys are going to be doing. So here you can see that the entire housing unit was made with these modules, the different modules that make part of the unit itself. And each module, depending on the way that you use the number of modules, you can expand and contract the housing unit itself. So for example, if there are more number of people, or let's say tomorrow my daughter got married to someone, and then they need their own private space, so on and so forth. So then how I can attach more modules within this, such that I can look at incrementality as value addition to the whole concept of housing here. The different materials that were used in this case, one of the key materials that was used is these slotted angles. These are metal sections, but they come with these pre slots that make part of the the section. So you get it in L angles, T section, C section, so on and so forth. And what is really great about using this as a material is that you can nut and bolt it very easily, and you don't need an expert in welding. So you don't need expertise in welding. And I think that is very important, especially given that we were looking at these housing units as more of a do-it-yourself or do-it-with-others concept. So then it's very important to think about how easily someone can put this together. So you can almost think of this as a flat pack IKEA sort of system, wherein you receive all the kit of parts, and then you open it, and then you have an instruction manual, and then you follow the instructions, and you have this particular housing unit ready for you to occupy. So again, something that we do with the studio is these sort of construction manuals. So you can see how the students demonstrate very small nuances of trying to understand what are the different aspects that make part of the design process. Because again, design processes are not something that you do on your table, but they're something that also transpire on site while you are building it. So I'm just going to walk you through some snippets of their construction manual, but you can access the whole document on the website. So I recommend, if you wish to see it, you can please go and see it. You can also see how the students talk about how do you create these sort of extensions, and eventually what is the entire process, what are the stages that make part of the building process itself. Something that was very important, which I missed out earlier, is that the use of something called bucket foundation. So I think because you guys are going to be making vaccination centers that are supposed to be temporal, and that's supposed to, after the use, not be on the site anymore. Something that we found very interesting is these bucket foundations. So you can actually use a bucket to make very small concrete blocks that you can embed within the ground, and you can fix your metal sections. You can weld it or bolt it onto the top of your bucket foundation itself. So for me, that was a very easy way to resolve the idea of foundation, because usually when you're building something that always is problematic is how do you resolve foundation, because foundation is supposed to be permanent. Um, this is a work of the semester that we just finished. Again, the brief was the same, but this time what we did is we split the entire settlement into 6 components that make part of a larger neighborhood. So you not only have the housing units, but we also came up with something called the emergency public architecture. So these are public architectures that make part of community spaces. So you can have, and I'll show you what the students did with respect to this. And then of course you have mobile devices, because for us, mobility and mobile devices make a very key component of the way the city is built. Then you have these structures that make part of the public space, play areas, so on and so forth. So I'll walk you through the emergency public architecture. So these are essentially your community spaces. What is an emergency public architecture? So for the students, they, after looking at the site and after looking at understanding the different people and stakeholders of the site, they recognize that the youth and the women were the most vulnerable population of the site. And therefore, they felt the need to make centers that could become safe spaces for the women and the youth. So you have the women's center and the youth center. So what they did is that they thought of this entire proposal as different kits that can grow and that has an incremental value through the different phases of development of the neighborhoods itself. So it looked for privacy, it accounted for the economic factor, it had a dormitory, it had an office unit, restroom unit, kitchen, so on and so forth. So they basically came up with 3 centers. You have the women's center, the sub center, and the youth center. And the materials that they thought of using in this particular case was scaffolding, which again is a very well, it's very popular nowadays. You see scaffolding being used a lot by a lot of student projects nowadays. But we also, while we were exploring scaffolding as a material, we came across this labor housing done by a practice called Hatch Workshop, and it's in Ahmedabad. And we went and visited the labor housing, and we saw that scaffolding as a material is very diverse. It's very nuanced, and it allowed for very easy construction and dismantling whenever necessary. So what the students did is, like I said, they imagined this entire thing to be built up in phases. So for example, if you see the women's center, they first identified what would be the 2 key things that you require to start. So they said that the office and the training center was important. So you start with a basic unit, then you attach a secondary unit which becomes the shop for the women, and eventually you can increment it onto the first floor and then increase it in size. So that's something that scaffolding allows, because scaffolding in itself is a modular system. It you can increment it depending on the sizing of the modules that you use. um, Something that they also did is, because they were using scaffolding as the main structure, they developed this catalog of parts. So how can you, for each unit, what are the different kinds of windows or doors that can make part of it? So depending on the kind of unit you want, so do you want it completely closed? Do you want it completely porous? The agency of deciding then went to the women and the youth. And of course, like I always stress that for us, understanding how do you implement the project is very important. And for me, I would recommend that even though you are doing a very small time problem, I think it's important for you to think about who maintains it, who owns it, where does the money come from, so on and so forth. I think that's a very key part of design processes. Um, these were the other projects that made part of the studio. And like I said, you can have a look at it on the website here. If you want, I can share the link with Neha and she can share it with all of you. But yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. You can, of course, look at more of our work in detail on our website. Yes, I'm done.
Yeah.
Please, if you all have questions.
Thank you so. Yes, yes. I think it was very elaborate. I think now the whole dictionary is actually open in front of you in terms of the materials what you have actually explored, you know. So I just quickly ask maybe students if you have any queries, or even faculty if you want to add anything or ask to Kruti anything. So we can just wrap up quickly.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
it was a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure there was a lot to learn for us as students because we are handling the modular design project. So my question is, what is the sort of process or the thought process selecting different materials with respect to every project, which explores the idea of modular design?
Right. So Isha, what we usually do is we don't go with anything that is preconceived in terms of trying to look at the material palette. We first, when we engage with a particular context, we try and understand what are the materials that people build with usually. Um, and for us, we find those answers more in the mobile devices or in informal constructions rather than the more formal architectural construction. So for example, we usually see that people usually resort to metal sections because they're durable. And for us, that makes it more sustainable rather than going with, say, bamboo. But if a particular context does have bamboo as a material that is available, we would definitely use it. Um, then, for example, even the infills, we change it based on the availability. So, for example, in that neighborhood, if we find someone who's a fabricator, we definitely use metal sections because then we know that we can locally build the project. And then if we, for example, if we find someone, if they are usually going for, say, a material like tarpaulin or plywood, then we would also try and experiment with those materials. So it kind of changes with what we encounter on site. I know if that,
Thank you so
I
much.
hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else want to ask anything?
Yes, ma'am. Hello.
Hi, Nidhi.
Yes, ma'am. It was a great presentation. My question is that how does the different user groups and like I saw in your presentation and site context help you to work towards shaping your own design paragraph?
Right. So for us, I think there are two components that make part of that process. One is we begin by sitting with them, like we have what we call the focus group discussion, which is a method that you use for participatory design processes. So usually we have these focus group discussions that we organize with a particular set of users that are going to make part of the eventual project. And when we do that, we sit down, we speak to them, we talk to them about their different requirements. So for example, like I was saying with the Gyan Ashray, we had like at least 2 to 3 meetings with Pushpa Ben and the women of the community, and we sat down and we were trying to understand how they use the space. Also, what we try and do is that when we are doing the whole construction process, we invite the community to be a part of it. So if they wish to be a part of it, or at least if they come and have a look at what is going around, if they don't necessarily have the time to make part of it, because something that we have to be very sensitive towards is that you cannot put the entire onus of building and construction on a particular community that is already stressed for time, because they are daily wage earners. They depend on a livelihood that engages them about 8 to 10 hours a day. So then how do you look at your own expertise, or you as a designer make part of that whole process and still engage the community back within that process? So depending on how the users are, so if it is the women, we have a particular kind of feedback that we get from them. If it's usually children, then there's a different kind of feedback. They're much more excited. They're much more, they have very crazy ideas and make part of this whole process. Or if it is something like the Pani Lari that is supposed to be pan community, that's more generic, then what we do is we organize multiple sessions. So something that we realized through our own engagement is that usually when we have a more generic meeting or a generic session with the people, the men tend to dominate the conversation. So what we try and do is that we make sure that there is two sessions that we organize, one that is more mixed, but another one that is more specific to the women or the children, such that their voices also are heard in that whole process of design. Something, sorry, just one last thing that I would like to add is that usually what happens in these cases is also that sometimes the community, we are outsiders and we have to recognize that we are outsiders. So it's very important to build the trust, and that is not something that you can expect to happen over one meeting. It's something that will happen over months or even years sometimes. And usually, the way to build that trust is to go through someone that they trust. So it could be a community leader, or it could be an NGO that works within that community, and approach them through those people so they can start trusting you as well. Because if you're just going to go and be like, oh, we are here to save you, it is never going to work. They will absolutely like shut down, and also you are nobody to save them. They're also um, solving their own issues. So then how do you negotiate that is something that we've been learning the last 3 years.
Yeah, right. And do they play any role on the site for like execution of the project?
So as of now, most of our projects, they have not played an active role, but we are hopefully through time, as time goes by and the pandemic hopefully subsides and we're all able to live normally again, we're hoping that they make part of that larger process. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone else want to ask, or we can conclude the session now?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mridula.
Hi, ma'am. Ma'am, I would like to ask that how do you define your approach in terms of dealing with the scale? As you know, most of your projects are on small scale. So, what is that pre-design process that you undergo to come up with the decisions regarding to the scale? I mean,
Right. So something that, like I was telling as I was walking you all through my presentation also, for us, although we recognize very consciously that most of our design projects are very small in scale, and they're these one-off, um, one small prototype that we do here and there. But for us, we are actively pushing the idea of small scale being that way of changing the larger narrative. So the idea is to how do you then multiply the same object, or to um, expand the same object to meet more people. And that's the way that we look at scale up. We don't look at scale up by saying that we want to do a large project, but rather we stick to our narrative of entering small and then triggering larger changes. Eventually, but not to say that we don't recognize that permanent solutions are required. We also recognize that permanent solutions are something that last longer, of course. But the idea is that till we reach that permanent solution, we need to still scale up the smaller interventions.
okay, thank
I
you,
think
ma'am.
I think on the same line, I think the last project what you mentioned or explained, Kruti, I think it was having that aspect of multiplicity and dealing with the scale at two different tangent altogether. So I think
yes. Because then you start to look at it as something that you inbuilt into your design. So you have to account that you may start small, but it has a capacity to scale up. So then your design has to respond in that format.
Correct. Anyone else?
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Hi, Smita.
So, ma'am, as we are experiencing a diverse climate in India, how should a designer keep the approach towards a wise material which can face harsh climatic condition, especially to deal with its temporal nature? Can you share your experience in Colombia having a different place altogether?
So Prasanna, with respect to materials, something that we realize is that in India, to deal with the different climatic conditions, one thing that we do is again we look at the smaller solutions that people have. So let's say that I don't know if you've seen these air coolers that are very locally available, but they have these cusp panels. I don't know if you all know about this, but do look it up. So they have these cusp panels which essentially are used to cool the air that passes through it. So what we try and do is we try and look at the innovations that are done in those smaller scales to look at how people are responding to the climatic condition and then try and take that and adapt it into our own design. So that's one way that you can respond to the whole climatic condition within India. So uh, unfortunately, we've not worked in very cold climates yet in India, but if we ever do, we'll perhaps look at what are the insulation methods that people use in in the north to try and understand how you can incorporate that into smaller conditions as well. With respect to Colombia, for us in Colombia, we've been trying to push for a lot of projects to come through, but they're all in their conceptual stage. The reason being in Colombia, things are a little bit more standardized with respect to the way architecture is approached. So we're in the middle. Let's say that we're in the middle of trying to break that barrier here. So the day that we do, I will have a better answer for how we do in Colombia. As of now, we're doing really well in India. I think in India there's a lot of reception to this kind of work because it's already inbuilt within the way that we live in our country. So for us, it's easier to do it in India right now.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
I think Smita ma'am, you were saying something.
Yeah, Neha, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, Kruti. It was a very exciting presentation, and I also found your studio projects that you have got done in CEPT University very exciting. And I have a couple of questions regarding that. One is that these projects call for a very intimate knowledge of different materials that one can use and that are available. So for the students, this knowledge data bank, how does it come? Because is it also a part of the studio pedagogy where they explore gaining the knowledge of these materials, or is it part of their other technological studios where these things are available? So that was my one question. And other question was, like as I could gather from your explanation, the studio brief itself, I think, was centered upon the idea of modularity, replicability, mobility, temporality, etc. And then, of course, the students have responded phenomenally. But what I would like to know is that if suppose if these attributes are not specifically put forward in the studio as objectives, but the objectives are kind of kept open in terms of the approaches. Suppose if the approaches are kept open, then I'm wondering that how many students would choose to kind of abandon the traditional methods of going about a building, that is masonry construction or RCC frame construction, etc. That is the most standard way by which even the students also start imagining the spaces, to begin with, when nothing specific is actually specified to them. So my question, again, to clarify, is that if the construction objectives were kept open, then how do we kind of motivate the students to go beyond the normal way of space making, and perhaps even go for a kind of a hybrid notion of construction leading to a hybrid way of space making? So I have these two separate questions for you.
Um, Thank you so much. I think both of them are very relevant questions, and we've faced, especially the second question, we faced it quite a lot in our studio. But I'll answer the first question first. So usually what we do with respect to trying to develop a material knowledge, at CEPT University, the entire onus of learning different subjects is all combined into one studio. So usually the students, so this is something that the university changed 2 years ago, wherein the studio is where the students learn everything. And their mandatory is something that is accessory, is something based on history or, other subjects. So for example, if for a studio like ours, if material construction is a very key component of it, we have to inbuilt within it sessions or exercises that can develop the knowledge of the students to understand those different materials that are available. So usually what we do is that we tell the students to go to the market. Like that's the best way for that we find that the student learners to go to the different stores that are there in the market. We give them numbers to different vendors. So since we've gone online, unfortunately, they've not been able to go to stores. But what we do is we have numbers of different vendors. So we get them in touch with the vendors, and then they, like over WhatsApp, they start getting details of the different material palette that is available in the market and what they can use. So that's how we deal with that sort of knowledge construction when it comes to material. To answer the second question, usually you're very right. Usually the students tend to go with brick and concrete as the default method by which they think about space and they think about construction. Um, I think by default, in our case, because we're looking at transit settlements, even if we would have said that, let's say that temporality is not an aspect that you need to consider. But given their understanding of how transit settlements develop within the city, I think by default, the students have started to pick methods that are, let's say, easy to construct, or they're more from the do-it-yourself category that sort of brings forward different ways of thinking of space and construction. Now, with respect to hybridization of this, we haven't explored it yet. We are, perhaps we can do that as the next step, but as of now, we've not done that. But I think that is also a very key aspect of trying to understand, because precisely I think we're at that sort of threshold where brick and RCC are going to start to become redundant. Then what do you do? Or do you then hybridize the whole system? But that's something that we still need to explore.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks. I think it clarifies a lot of things. And I do realize that that the nature of design problems itself many a times are prompting a kind of approach that the students are taking. So that's quite true. Right. I mean, thank you for being with us actually today. And I think you have opened a whole new fresh window for our students to think about, and for us also, as teachers.
No, I'm so glad. Like I said, I'm very happy to be part of the whole process and to contribute from whatever that we can with our own experience.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So I think it was great. I think Kruti, the way Smita ma'am has said, and I think Kavita Pradhan has also said a lot of thank you, because it was completely a new window from where we are looking at something which is a very basic maybe concept, but the exploration which is being needed maybe, because when we are talking about these exploration in terms of different cities, being in Bombay, being in Ahmedabad, the city also has its own challenges to deal with in terms of design or in terms of any other, fraternity. So I feel that definitely that also matters to us. And I think the pandemic has also made us realize so many things that, which things are actually possible and which is not. So it was great. I think if I have still any questions, I will revert back to you. And I think you have already mentioned about your website, and also I will just make students aware of it. I think thank you
Yes,
so
yes.
much for
No,
this
thank you
session.
so much. I just want to like add one small thing that I would urge the students to try and the brief that you all have set up, I would urge them to try and go beyond that, to try and also question what components of the brief can become, well, say, stationary versus something that you can sort of make it mobile or sort of deploy from the sort of more like a mothership kind of a thing. So it's trying. I think it's time that as students we started to push the brief a little bit more, and I would urge all the students to do that.
Thank you so much, Kruti.
Thank you, Neha, and I hope everyone has enjoyed the presentation. I'm sorry I took very long, but
one more thing I just missed to mention is that amazing set of representation, and the graphical representation, the colors, and the way you are presenting ideas. I think it is very fresh. I mean, it is very fresh to look at, and it is exactly the way we look at new things. So I think definitely it is very inspirational also at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being there. Yeah.
Good
I will
luck,
share. I
everyone.
will reconnect. Sorry.
Yes, Neha. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was saying I will just reconnect with you on the mail. So maybe we can take a leave for today.
Yes. Thank you. Good luck, everyone. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Kruti. Yeah, bye-bye.